So, thinking about the topic of family, what does the church say, or what does Scripture potentially say about these things? Well, one way of getting at the issue, I suppose, is the church gives a day called Holy Family Sunday, and it's an opportunity to reflect on what makes a family holy. Now, it's true that Scripture gives lots of advice about how to make families psychologically healthier and more functional, perhaps even happier. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, the book of Sirach actually kind of gives quite a degree of information really about that. It gives kind of advice like recommendations for children to obey their father, bring comfort to their mothers, and take care of fathers even when they're old and frail in some way. Ultimately, to be considerate of parents. And there are a number of these nice practical bits of what you could call psychological advice that they're very wise and helpful. And in the reading of in the book of St. Paul's letter to Colossians, if I could say it right, there's a similar vibe, and he recommends putting on what he calls heartfelt compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, and bear with one another, forgiving one another, and that kind of thing. And it's essentially really, really good advice. And it's extremely important within the family context to actually have a heart that's bearing forgiveness and putting up with the faults and failings of other people. And if we can't forgive, essentially what happens is that our families fall apart. So what is there to be said really about it? Because the truth is that any person of any particular faith, or even no faith at all, could use this advice. Because there's nothing particularly religious about it. If anything, it's kind of psychological. It makes for a psychologically adjusted family. But the question is, what makes a family holy? And what does that exactly mean? And I suppose to get at that particular question, you'd have to try and go a little bit deeper, particularly into Scripture. So one figure we could perhaps look at is Saint Joseph, the husband of Mary, the foster father of Jesus. And when we kind of think about Saint Joseph, a few things maybe comes to mind. And perhaps it points us in the direction of what might make a family or family life holy. And we think about the first time we encounter Joseph is, in the old, he is, I suppose, I don't know if it's the first time or not, but one of the things to mention is that he is the receiver and the interpreter of dreams, and that kind of corroborates the Old Testament figure. And it's said that the angel of the dream came to him and told him to take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, because Herod was in pursuit of the newborn. But bear in mind that at this point Joseph had been through quite a lot. He endured, I suppose, what could be called the embarrassment of Mary's pregnancy, which back then would have caused a lot of kind of eye raising, I guess, and she was pregnant before she was married. So he endured that kind of thing, and then he and his Mary, they made the dangerous journey to Bethlehem, and in Bethlehem they also endured further humiliation, and they couldn't find a place for Jesus to be born, and then after that, again Joseph received another message in a dream, that Jesus was being sought by the king, And he must have pondered how could that be? Why would this king be after an innocent little child? And then more to it, he's commanded to travel to a foreign country over extremely dangerous roads where water and food and safety was in short supply, and there's dangers almost at every turn. And he was with a woman just having given birth to a tiny newborn baby. Any commonsensical person would say he was nuts. He was crazy even thinking about taking on a journey like that. But yet, Joseph and his family went to Egypt. And I suppose it is that they stayed there presumably for several years. And again, at the prompting of an angel, he once again uproots his family once more and takes them on another dangerous journey. And it's the case that, again, dangers were there, and that it doesn't again make a lot of sense when he again took his family on this journey. But the point is that Joseph did consistently what God requested, even when it meant danger to his family, even when it was anything but clear precisely what God had in mind. And Joseph took the child and his mother, and he went to the land of Israel, to the region of Galilee. And time again, at the prompting of the angel, Joseph subordinated compassion for his family to the will and purpose of God. He didn't stop loving Mary and the child, but he situated love for them within the framework of his love for God. And that is precisely what it means in terms of the Holy Family. What it means is essentially that the Holy Family puts love of God first. So that's perhaps one thing to think about in terms of what makes families holy. Now, with that in mind, there are other Old Testament figures, and what immediately comes to mind is the story of Abraham. And God promised that he would raise up to Abraham generations of descendants, and the vehicle for the fulfillment of that promise was the child Isaac. But then, extraordinarily, God asked for Isaac in sacrifice. God commanded, and Abraham obeyed. And that's what made Abraham holy. Hannah prayed with all her soul for a son over many years, and God in his mercy gave her a son, Samuel. But we hear that at the moment that the child was weaned, Hannah gives the child back to God. She journeys to the temple, and then she gives the child to Eli, the priest who raises him. Did she love him? Absolutely. She was psychologically and emotionally attached to him, but she loved and obeyed God first, and that's what made her family holy. There's a demand higher than even the demand of the most intense loves that we feel, and that is the demand of God. And the Gospel gives us a particular story in the story of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. It was the custom for the firstborn male to be brought to the temple to be presented to God. Now, for a first century Jew, what that implied is that Jesus' parents were dedicating him to God. But more to it, the temple was the place of sacrifice, and animals were sacrificed unto God. And that in some way anticipated the terrible events that were to happen many years later, when Jesus himself will offer himself in that holy city of Jerusalem precisely as a sacrifice unto God. And then we see the willingness of Mary and Joseph to again subordinate their love for Jesus to a higher love, and that's exactly what makes their family holy. And in Luke's Gospel, when Jesus is 12 years old and his parents take him to the same place, And they think he's just wandering about with other members of the family, and they've lost sight of him. And then they panic because they've lost him. And they go back to Jerusalem searchingly, desperately for their son. And where do they find him? They find him in the temple, in his father's house, that place of sacrifice. And when Mary says, "Don't you know we've been looking for you? How much anguish you've caused?" And he says in that kind of devastating way, "Didn't you know I should be about my Father's business?" But again, here we see that the love that Jesus had for Mary and Joseph, it's real psychologically, but it's situated now in the higher context of his love for his Father. And again, that's what makes his family holy. His Father's business, that's more important, more pressing, more demanding than even the strongest family obligations. And we can tend to be romantic, I guess, about families, emphasizing the emotional ties. And certainly it would be said that the Bible doesn't have anything against these kinds of connections. But it teaches that a family will paradoxically be stronger the more it subordinates to God's will and purpose. The family will be stronger the more each member of the family subordinates his or her love to for the family to the greater love of God. The great insight from Aristotle comes to mind, and he says that friendship will endure in the measure that the two friends fall in love together with a transcended third, falling in love not just with each other, but together with some greater good that transcends them both. Then they will stay together. So in a very similar way now, family bonds will be greater in the measure that together the family members fall in love with God and subordinate their love for each other to their love of God. And that, friends, is what makes a family holy. God bless you.